Good morning and welcome back to the VIP seat. Today is September 16th. We have a guest on today's show. Welcome to Joseph LaRousso, also your co-host here as usual, Jessie, Naor, and Preston, Holland. Lots of interesting things to cover this week. We're really going to dive into the mental health and Aviation Act that's coming out, which Joseph has some expertise on. So Joe, thank you for coming to the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, Preston. Well, let's kick it off first with a little bit of news. So I sent this to you last week. You know, I'm the space nerd. So we're talking about SpaceX and EchoStar have entered into an agreement. They bought Spectrum basically from EchoStar, but I don't think what people are really paying attention to here is that EchoStar also owns Hughes. And guess who designed GoGo's steering antennas for their Wi-Fi system? Hughes. So it's an interesting little conundrum.
Yeah, it's yet again a battle in the connectivity. It's funny, I was at an event and somebody was asking me, like, hey, what do you think about Starlink? And if you actually look at like the install base, the Starlink install base in business aviation is incredibly low. Like as a percentage across the entire fleet, it's still not super large and penetrated, but they're making a lot of moves right now that are really pushing towards, being competitive in not only the business aviation space, but also the aviation space in general. So you have the United announcement, and I think that is just huge tailwind. So I'd say, although Starlink does not have the highest install base, I think Starlink has like the most rapid growth trajectory in front of it. And that's what the big threat is to GoGo and some of the other like the low Earth orbit, and then what's the other word? It's like it's a funny, air to ground, ATG, yeah. And no one uses ATG anymore because it sucks. And so I think that's Starlink really has the biggest chance. I think the bigger case is the direct to cell phone. I think that is way more interesting because, for instance, I was flying last week to Washington, D.C. with my friend in his Meridian, and he did not have Starlink. I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, what? Like everybody who flies piston airplanes has these things. And I was trying to send a text and I was holding my phone out and it was like, angle it this way. And then maybe like this. And I'm sitting over there, like trying to hold the phone out of the window. But I think that the direct to phone is even more of a threat to, air text and some of those other types of like low bandwidth, send a text or an email here or there. I think that's pretty big if they can get that figured out.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's interesting times in connectivity. It has been for a couple of years. Starlink has just dominated the skies, literally. Over 6,000 satellites are in the air. GoGo has been trying to come out with kind of a competitor product with low Earth orbit satellites. I always have a hard time saying that too, LEO satellites. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out because look, it's not like Hughes is still going to be producing, I assume, these antennas for GoGo. But you have to think about, okay, if the parent company is entering these really big agreements and relationships with SpaceX/Starlink, what's the long-term relationship going to look like? Or is GoGo going to have to pivot to another, antenna producer? We'll just have to see how this all plays out.
Joe, is there any sort of at some point does it become anti-competitive? You're the attorney here. And so this is not legal advice for anybody who's listening. So to be clear, this is not, and none of this information is under attorney-client privilege. But Joe, is there any sort of macro competitive landscape that Starlink could run into in this space?
Oh, there's always the monopoly arguments, right? But I don't know that it's a big enough space for that really to come up and for there to be really SEC arguments or anything like that. I don't know. I can tell you that from a pilot side, if I take the attorney hat on and put the pilot hat on, I fly for 4 different operators and only one of them uses GoGo. And it is becoming a Starlink absolute domination. Even not even doing formal installs, right? But putting Starlink mobile and just suction cupping that thing to a bathroom window. That's big. All of a sudden, that's been a big move.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think the one other thing that people forget about is that just the connectivity internet inside the back of the cabin is not the only thing that GoGo does. There's a lot of other integrated systems that go into that. And those we have to have, right? There is you have to have those types of systems if you want to, you want to fly overseas or you want to fly, some different radar systems that integrate there. So I think that as you look at I would imagine, now this is total speculation. I would imagine that the connectivity side is really high margin. Like I would bet that you're charging people $10,000 a month for kind of crappy Wi-Fi. There's probably pretty good margins in that, right? They have to pay for their own hardware. They have to pay for their own installation. And then you charge them $10,000 a month and your incremental cost is zero. So I would imagine that everybody at these connectivity shops are saying, okay, well, we have to pivot, and you're probably going to get an increase in the rest of your connectivity software subscriptions because they're going to have to make up for that really high margin, Wi-Fi somewhere.
Yeah, and they'll just start doing these partnerships too. I think it's the same, we see with cell phone networks. You've got your Boost Mobiles and everybody else. They're not necessarily on, their own networks. They're just kind of like licensing from each other and taking from each other and acquiring and merging. And it's an interesting time, but definitely good for the consumer out there because there's more and more options and more pressure on all these players.
That's definitely true. Yeah.
I prefer Starlink. I mean, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. It's faster. I mean, let's be honest. Like, yeah, I've taken phone calls. Like, I was flying on a Challenger 350 from New York to Miami, and I FaceTimed my wife, and she was like, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" I was like, "Nothing. We're flying." She's like, "Wait, what?" And it's like it was clear. It was clearer than if I was going to call her over a cellular network. I mean, it's nuts. Like, it's crazy how fast it is.
Yeah,
I will say too, I had like downtime. I've got at my farm, I have a Starlink here because we don't get broadband or anything. We had downtime for like a day or two where it was running a little slow, and I was like, well, that's annoying. But then they automatically issued me a credit to my account. I didn't even have to ask. They just like said, oh, we didn't reach our uptime, and here's some money. I was like, that's pretty nice.
That's awesome.
Good. That's good customers.
You know what I've noticed with one operator in particular that can't go Starlink that's still running GoGo is Starlink has trouble at the poles. So if you're running super high north and super high or super low southern poles, Starlink, for whatever reason, their orbit is not conducive to having connectivity on either pole, whereas GoGo still does. So if you're operating in the high latitudes or the low latitudes, you have to use GoGo. There's no option. Starlink won't pick it up.
Well, and probably Viasat too. That's probably one of their like legacy targets.
Right. Yeah. So until they figure that out, I don't know that they're going to have government contracts.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's pivot to our favorite moment of the show. Mile High Madness is our segment. Joseph is new to the show here, so this is our crazy part of the show where we just show what's going on in social media, what our favorite posts were, what our most ridiculous posts were. Preston, do you want to kick us off today?
I do. I'm going to preface this with Joseph has probably got a few experiences like this. But I was scrolling through Instagram, and my friend Joel Mayo, who I think is the highest time Cirrus Vision Jet pilot like in the world, and if he's not, he's got to be pretty darn close. Like he's got more time than most other Cirrus drivers combined. He posted this Instagram story, and you just never know on your pilot adventure who you might run into. For those who don't have, millennial wives or daughters who freak out about music, this is two of the Jonas Brothers. I honestly couldn't tell you which ones.
Didn't know who they were.
This is two of the Jonas Brothers. I don't know, Nick and Joe or something like that. My wife is going to be so mad when she listens to this. Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. But it's the Jonas Brothers. And so I replied to Joel. I said, man, my wife would be freaking out right now. So you just never know who you might run into at Signature Aviation in the in the FBO and then get a picture with them. So I was like, you know what, that's pretty cool. And he replied and said, yeah, it was crazy. These two dudes who were like sitting in the FBO and they're like, oh my gosh, you're Joel Mayo. Can we take a picture with you? He's like, I said, okay, fine.
Hey, well, way better than that than being like clobbered by hundreds of millennial ladies wanting to take your picture in the airport. So I get what they fly private.
That really is like the great equalizer though, right? I mean, at an FBO, you got, globals running through that are $100 million globals. And then you got like a 172 that's like a 17,172, right? Like $70,000
exactly.
172. But you're all using the same signature.
Exactly.
All right. So for my Mile High segment today,
till nearly 2 hours away. I let the pilot said that he'd have to go with someone else if we couldn't feed. Then we made a bet. There were some tough carpet stains and I wasn't sure if I can get them out. So we agreed that if I could remove them, I would charge double. If not, I'd cut the price in half. It seemed fair to me as I wasn't planning on doing anything today anyway. As aircraft detailers, we have to follow a standard operating procedure when...
All right, so I'll stop it there. Essentially this detailer, This was actually a jet coming from Burning Man that he had to clean. So I don't know how much he had to spend, but he's got this whole channel where he goes through and tells you like how much someone spent on the detailing, what airplane he did. I just thought it was really interesting and cool. And shout out to our detailers out there, because that's a tough mission sometimes.
Yeah, it's a tough gig. I will say the only problem I have with this guy is that he is inspired. I have gotten 15 people send me DMs on Twitter being like, hey, so I'm thinking about starting an aircraft detailing business because it apparently is insanely high margins and they make a ton of revenue and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you saw that guy on Instagram and TikTok, didn't you? They're like, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. Like, I really want to do this thing. What do you think? And I'm like, I'm going to deflate your bubble. Your insurance premium is going to be insane. And that dude, at the end of the day, that guy has a really high paying job, because notice he was like on vacation or hanging out with his girlfriend or whatever, and he gets a phone call. And so he drops everything he does and goes out and does all of the work. So he just has a really high paying job as a detailer, but not necessarily like a company. And that's the other problem too, is that like all of your employees, they're going to get good enough that they have a couple of clients' phone numbers, and then they're going to go start their own detailing company, like at the end of the day. So it's like, it's a great business. It's, and they do fantastic work and we have to have them. But like, if you're sitting here going, oh, you know what, I'm going to disrupt the aircraft detailing space and I'm going to start a business, like, think again.
It is definitely, that's a hard job. And that is a hard job from the quality control side of the house, because when we call a detailer, when you land and you know that you're going to need a detailer, I mean, you're almost texting them before you roll to a stop, right? Hey, get out here, I need you to look at this carpet or something like that, right? And when they come out there, that is very, very critical work, right? I mean, we're looking over them going, no, I don't think so, try it again, right? Like the whole, I'd agree if I could get it out, I would make double type situation. Maybe, but it's more like, no, you're going to get it out and I'm going to make sure that it's out. Like that is, I don't know, at times a very thankless and a very high, there's a lot of eyes on you on that job.
For sure. And sometimes there's some really gross things that happen. I can tell you as a former operator, usually involving alcohol.
Yeah. Facts.
Yeah.
The Mental Health and Aviation Act has been passed in the House last week. Joseph has been heavily engaged in this issue in the industry. A lot of us have, but I think Joseph has been really one of the leaders, thought leaders in the space. So tell us what's in the act, kind of, how this came about. We know there's been other things, in the FAA reauthorization bill, all sorts of things have happened over the years. Where are we at now?
Yeah, this is so big news right off the gate is the Mental Health and Aviation Act of 2025 went through the House unanimously. And it went through the House like last week. So really, really cool. What's in this act, in order to kind of figure that out, you got to step back a little bit. We have kind of had, and I joke with my colleagues and with the employees at Ramos Law in the aviation department that mental health was the hill that for some reason a decade ago I decided I was going to die on. That we are not, our industry is so bad with mental health, so bad with mental health. You got pilots who refuse to get it because they're worried about losing their medicals, or you got pilots that are getting it that are lying about it to the FAA and are just waiting to get their tickets pulled. In no way, column A, column B, they're both bad. And I just don't see why we can't just be open and honest about pilots being human beings and occasionally needing to talk to a counselor or a therapist or, like anybody else would do, right? I don't understand why our industry, we can't do that. So there was a big push and it kind of ramped up, for the majority of the last decade. I feel like it's been yelling against the wall and nobody's been hearing it at all. And finally, in the last couple of years, since 2023, a window appeared on that wall and that window is now open, right? And people are hearing the screaming for mental health. And what really pushed it, and this is going to be kind of a sensitive subject, but what pushed it was Joe Emerson with the attempt to grab the T handles. There were so many layers to that opened up a full mental health arena, right? Dealing with the tragic loss of his friend, trying to use alternative, I'll call it medicine, but trying to use alternative medicine to treat what was really at its core a mental health issue. And then, of course, having a mental break from all that building up and not being able to release it in a healthy and clinical way. If finally, that tea kettle overboiled and we had the tea handle event. So At that point in time, if you guys remember, the FAA announced that they were going to put together a mental health roundtable, and they were going to do an ARC. And then at the same time, the NTSB announced that they were going to do a mental health aviation safety committee. Both announced it on the exact same day, both trying to get Congress's attention that they're the best entity. So in any event, we did get the ARC. The ARC came out April 1, such an unfortunate day for putting out ARC recommendations. Till this day, it still kind of bothers me that they put it out on April Fool's Day of 2024. But nevertheless, we got 24 recommendations, 164-page report. I've never seen an ARC that robust in my entire life. So many recommendations for mental health change. And what did the FAA do with it? Thank you very much for your recommendations. That's the end of it. Never push forward at all. So Pilot Mental Health Committee was formed, PMHC. Myself and another Ramos attorney, Zeke Dennison, are on the board of it. And the big push was, all right, FAA, if you're not going to take the recommendations, we're going to force you to take the recommendations. So from starting up PMHC in like kind of late 23, right around early 24 till now, there's a bill pushed through the House, the Mental Health and Aviation Act. That was PMHC's big push to draft this bill with Representative Caston to get it to the House. It was first, believe it or not, it was first introduced in 24 in the 118th Congress. It didn't go through. Now here we are to the 119th, and it went through unanimously. And all that's in it is forcing the FAA to recognize the ARC and to take the recommendations and to put them forward into legislation and regulation.
That's amazing. So I've been on ARCs before as well that, went kind of nowhere. And it's very frustrating because we spent, 2 to 3 years hammering each other. I mean, you have people, from the pilot groups, you have people from trade groups, you have industry, and you come up with these great solutions. You spend years working on these things, and then it ends up in a box somewhere at the FAA and goes nowhere. That's exciting. But I think it takes efforts like yours to really get people engaged and saying, hey, like we've done all the work here. We have the recommendations from a lot of experts. Do something with it, please.
Yeah, just do it. And you know what's cool about it? This is one of the coolest parts about it is the FAA every year has to spend on a fiscal budget. They have to spend $1.5 million in public re-education. So what I have faced over the past decade that's been really, really a struggle is the public expects their pilots to be perfect. And I have had an issue where I've gone to senators, I've gone to congressmen, I've gone to congresswomen and said, hey, can we do something about mental health in aviation? And I have gotten the closed door answer, behind the scenes of, Joe, what do you expect me to do? My constituents want perfect pilots, right? Nobody wants to get on a plane and think that this person is dealing with depression or anxiety sitting in front of them. And so we have faced this public stigma where now pilots are they just push it under, right? So the public thinks that they're sitting behind somebody that is not suffering from depression, not suffering from PTSD, not suffering from anxiety. Truth be told, the majority are, but they're not seeking treatment. And so what's the scenario, right? Every person deals with anxiety, depression, some sort of emotional strife in their life. And most people deal with it in a very healthy way, get talk therapy, do something over the course of some months, right, or years, and they get it handled. Would you rather, as a public, have somebody up front who's dealing with those same human emotions that everybody deals with, but is not seeking treatment? Or would you rather somebody who's dealing with those human emotions that everybody deals with and is seeking treatment and is very good and is in a good mental and emotional state to fly that airplane safely? So now the FAA has to spend $1.5 million. If this goes through the Senate, they got to spend $1.5 million every fiscal year to re-educate the public on why this is necessary and why pilots can get help.
But also there's, I want to say, wasn't it $40 million set aside for programs to actually get pilots to go seek help and get treatment and approve new medications that other countries have already approved before.
And train AMEs.
Yeah.
Yep. It's big. Yeah, it's big.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's what's crazy to me is like I don't know why we still have held on to this for so long. I mean, mental health is no different than any other physical ailment. You have heart disease, you take heart disease medication. You have diabetes. And yeah, there's obviously, if a medication has a certain side effect that would preclude you from flying or isn't proven to be safe, fine. I totally get that. but we need to move at a quicker pace with approving medications that are proven. And if nothing else, like, pilots should be able to talk to therapists without anybody like getting into their business. I'm sorry. Like, I don't see why, at least talk therapy, there should be absolutely no restrictions on that whatsoever. It's crazy to me. For temporary situations, for long-term situations, I think we're so living in the past. And even I was arguing with someone on LinkedIn last week too that had the same perspective. Like, well, certain jobs you need to have like perfect mental health. And I'm like, yeah, you can have perfect mental health if you treat it. I'm like, this is crazy.
How is perfect mental health not inclusive of treatment, right?
Right.
And it's interesting that you brought up the medication, because this was also introduced with the second act. So PMHC has two acts that pushed through, and they both got introduced at the same time. This one went through unanimously. The Mental Health and Aviation Act went through unanimously. The other one has not yet gone through. The other one is the Aviation Medication Transparency Act. And that's exactly what you were talking about. Is I have had pilots who have called me pre-surgery talking to an anesthesiologist going, Joe, this doc says I'm about to take this for anesthesia. Am I allowed to take that? And I always have to have that conversation of, yes, yeah, you're in take it. Yeah, we'll sort it out in the back end, but yeah, take what you need to take right now. Like, I've had pilots who have said to me, no, Joe, I can go through this without anesthesia. I can, like, it's ridiculous. So the Aviation Medication Transparency Act requires the FAA to publish the term that they hate using, but we all use because we know it's true. They have to publish their blacklist. So tell us what prescription medication you guys know behind the scenes that you're about to deny a pilot on, so that we don't have to hit a forum and everybody types into the forum of, has anybody had gabapentin? Well, how'd that go? Did anybody take this drug? How'd that go? Right? We actually can have a full list, much like the FAA just did with the over-the-counter medications. That was in response to this bill initially getting introduced to the 118th. The FAA published their over-the-counter. Not good enough. This bill got reintroduced to the 119th Congress, and hopefully this one goes through as well.
I was just going to say, it just kind of feels like a lot of this is a little bit of like, it's all common sense, right? Like,
yes,
you can take, like, there's a lot of other places where it's like, you can take this, you cannot take that. And so therefore you can abide by those rules. And I think it's actually, so my brother-in-law is a engineer on the railroad. So he works for the railroad. They have a lot of similar problems. So I think it's like a DOT transportation problem in general. This is like, pilots are not the only ones who are plagued by this, because like, he will go through stuff and he's like, I don't know if I can actually take this medicine. Like, it's, and they get randomed, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you couldn't take that medicine that the other 99% of the world is totally fine to take. Like, we're not talking about letting pilots do ketamine, right? Like, that's not that's not what anybody's arguing for, right? But I think that like, it's more about creating like common sense, right? Like, yes, this is all like very standard stuff for the rest of the world, and treat pilots the same way. Like, pilots are the best. Like, they are highly trained. They are incredibly good under pressure. Like, there's a lot of things that pilots are, and it's like, let them keep doing that in a framework that is, I don't know, realistic, right? Instead of like the guessing game, I think is the biggest. It's like not allowing therapy, huge deal, but the guessing game on medications, like, I mean, that's core fundamental, right? Like, you can argue, should my pilot be sad sometimes or not, right? Like, obviously it's stupid, but you can kind of see people trying to make an argument. But like, can I take this medication when I'm having surgery, when I tore my ACL playing basketball, right? Like, yeah, like that's, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, and to those, I mean, who go and say, well, no, they have to be perfect. Okay, well, they're not perfect. No one is. And what's going to happen, and what I've seen a lot, is alcoholism turning to other approved methods of treatment, non-approved methods of treatment. So that's the alternative here. We either embrace this and embrace healthy ways of dealing with life and coping with things, because anxiety is on the increase, depression is on the increase. But to say that, they can't get actual treatment, and so they end up in the hotel bar until 2 a.m., throwing back shots because they're stressed out or sad. I mean, that's what happens. That's the alternative that we live in today.
Yeah, and Jesse, you're right. I mean, that brings up a whole nother topic about the HIMSS program, right? For those that don't know that, the Human Intervention Motivational Study is what HIMSS stands for. It is not a study. It's never been a study. you can FOIA and ask for the study. The study doesn't exist. So I don't know why that name is there. But what HIMSS HIMSS was started by ALPA in the 70s to correct what they saw as a problem of alcoholic airline pilots. And HIMSS back then was a very successful program, so successful that it was dropped and it wasn't needed anymore. And then it was picked up again by a third party. It is not an FAA program. It's a third party program owned by a company here in Denver. And now it is back in full force. And the FAA constantly says that they're dealing with an epidemic of alcoholic pilots from Part 91 through 135 through 121, right? Your general aviation pilots, your corporate, and your airline pilots. And they say that they're fighting this wall of alcoholic pilots. And they're so head in the sand that they're not realizing, one, how they defined an alcoholic pilot is they're still using the DSM, the regulatory body which defines mental diagnosis and mental conditions, from 1987. They're still using that book when we're on the DSM-5 TR that's current now. So one, they're
using the old version of it. Oh my God.
Yeah, all the regs were last updated in the 80s. And so they're still using terms like substance abuse, substance dependence. The DSM and the clinical industry has not recognized those terms from two DSMs ago. Now it is substance use disorder, mild, severe, right? So the FAA is still using old terms. They don't recognize new terms. But two, they're so head in the sand on this alcohol issue that they're not looking at the reason of why pilots are turning to alcohol. Jesse, to your point, they turn to alcohol because that's the only thing they can turn to. That's it. It's self-medication. And you know what proves that too is I've only had, in a decade of dealing with the HIMSS program, I could probably count on one hand the amount of pilots that have actually relapsed. And when you look at that as compared to the full substance use clinical picture outside of the pilot world, but all in America, I think everybody knows somebody who's dealing with some sort of substance addiction. How many times have they relapsed? They typically relapse 2 or 3 times before it sticks. Yet in the last decade, I can count on one hand how many pilots have quote unquote relapsed, what I believe to be a true relapse. And it's because they're medicating, they're self-medicating. And when somebody catches them, the FAA, and goes, can't do that anymore, what they do is they go, okay. And it's because they weren't an addict to alcohol. They were dealing with mental health issues and they turned to whatever they could, right? So it's not an addiction, it's a medication. It's a very weird program.
So if this passes Senate, which I'm not really sure what the timing is that, happening now? When can we expect maybe something to actually change? We've got this momentum, hopefully passes in the Senate, and then what?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. It still has to go to the Senate. It still has to end up on the president's desk to become law. Hopefully that happens relatively quickly. Not sure if it will. Certainly not sure about the last part of that equation, if we're going to get a presidential sign off on that.
Why? And why is there a core reason why that's the belief?
Yeah. So the DCA crash, that was very hard for our industry. And that was very hard because it got politicized immediately before an investigation was actually done. And while it was being politicized, Trump came out and said what the FAA has now ironically leaned into, but the best and the brightest need to be air traffic controllers, need to be pilots. We can't have anybody with mental health. We can't have anybody with disabilities. He turned it into a DEI issue. We can't have anybody with mental health struggles. So he came out and said that in the wake of a very horrific crash for our industry. And so now if this goes to him, we got to think, is he going to toe that line that he created, or is he going to walk it back and acknowledge that this is good legislation for a good purpose? So
I would imagine with unanimous support, especially if the same thing happens in Senate, it would be hard to not sign. But maybe this is a good cue for our listeners to also maybe write their senators and support.
Exactly. And this is bipartisan, right? So yeah, it doesn't matter what side of the line you're on. This was a bipartisan bill. So is the Aviation Medication Transparency Act. That was bipartisan as well and remains bipartisan. So yeah, anybody should be on board with this. And you're exactly right. Hopefully it's unanimous through the Senate. Now, once it comes out and becomes law, there's 2 different timelines on it. There's a 1-year timeline and a 2-year timeline. The 2-year timeline is for them to acknowledge, accept, and put into action the ARC recommendations. So the FAA has been notoriously bad about 2-year, about any timelines, but certainly 2-year timelines. If you guys remember, back in September of 24, the Reauthorization Act, I believe it was September 8th, the Reauthorization Act went through. And with the Reauthorization Act called for the FAA to build a focus group of 180, or within 180 days, to build a focus group that is designed to revamp and retwork and kind of rebuild, modernize the regulations pertaining to everything. So everything would get not only mental health, but substance, as I call it, abuse dependence, all the mental health stuff, the cardiac stuff, everything like that was supposed to be modernized. And the FAA was supposed to put together that roundtable within 180 days of the Reauthorization Act. I can tell you, as of today, sitting here, still not done. They still haven't done that. That 180 days have long since passed, and we still have no group formed. We have
why? Where's the accountability there? I mean, like, if Congress says you have to do this, and then the FAA says okay, and then the FAA doesn't do it,
yeah,
is there any repercussion? Like, how do you
there's
stop
another government agency, the GAO, who says, hey, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and then it goes back and forth again.
It comes up in funding. So every 2 years when we have the reauthorization, in the months prior, we always have this, okay, FAA, what have you done? Right? And then they fall on their sword and they go, yeah, we've done nothing. And then Congress goes, well, you need to do more. And then we get another reauthorization.
I love the government.
And then they fail on that again.
I love the government so much. It's such an effective body. It's awesome.
It's very frustrating. Like, for example, the HIMSS program is another, I keep turning to it, but it nicely demonstrates all this. So the HIMSS program, they got federally funded, even though they're owned by a third party. They got federally funded in 10 years ago. So before the Reauthorization Act that just went through in September, the FAA, Congress turned to the FAA and said, hey, we're paying money for this HIMSS program. How's it going? We haven't seen any data. Do you guys have like data that you keep? And the FAA went, oh my God, we don't have data. So the FAA went and hired the NAS, the National Academy of Sciences. They paid them $1 million to come in and audit the HIMSS program. And that came out in August before the reauthorization in September. And they, over a 504-page report, the NAS tore them up. Said this is a horrible program. It's not based in clinical medicine. There's no data that shows it's successful, like hammered it. And the FAA essentially just swept that under the rug and turned to Congress and went, yeah, we'll do better. So, I mean, most people don't even know that study exists, right?
Is that study public information?
Oh yeah. It's cool. Public.
We're gonna link it in the newsletter.
Perfect. Thank you.
Joseph's gonna help us figure that out. So the VIPseat.com. I write the newsletter for those people who read it. So I will be sure that it's linked in the newsletter.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. And it's one of those that the FAA swept under the rug. And what's funny is the HIMSS convention is right now in Denver. Started this morning at 8:00. So
not there, Joseph.
I'm not invited anymore.
A quick note on the Charlie Kirk assassination last week. There was a conspiracy that a private jet had taken the killer or someone related to the killer and turned off their ADS-B mysteriously. That is not the case. The person who owns the jet has come out and said, hey, I have nothing to do with this. Please leave me alone. So let's stop bugging this poor
I'm sure everybody if you're like me, you're like anybody in the industry, everybody's mom and uncle and grandparent is like texting this, like, is this true? And you're looking at it and you're like, this is such a ridiculous. I mean, this is ridiculous. First of all, if they're going to do that, they would have turned it off before they took off. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And it's yet another use of ADS-B abuse. I saw somebody on Facebook that got a bill from Signature in the mail because of ADS-B. I think they were doing a touch and go, and they did a touch and go. And by God, they got levied a $25 facility fee for doing their touch and go. And they're like, this is ridiculous. So it's, ADS-B abuse definitely does exist.
It does. Well, one last question, Joseph. I know a lot of people that are listening that could be struggling with mental health issues. What can you do today? What is allowed? What's not allowed? What can you do to get yourself treatment and help without breaking the regs today?
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I get asked that all the time. And the number one thing that I tell people is get better. Go seek treatment, right? And the best thing to do is to come forward to an aviation attorney. There's many, many great aviation attorneys around the country. Obviously, I'm partial to ours, but there's many great firms that do this around the country. But lean into them and say, look, I'm dealing with something. I'd like to press pause and I'd like to go get some treatment. And then an FAA attorney can work on the side to start getting all the documentation necessary for when you have to disclose that to the FAA come your MedExpress time, right? Come your renewal. So that way, when you're submitting your MedExpress, you can submit it with the proper documentation so that it doesn't bounce back and forth. And that's the biggest problem we have right now is the FAA is taking way too long to turn around a medical, way too long to consider it. And they know they're taking too long. And so in order to have, ease their 30,000 medical backlog right now, which is what it is, in order to ease that backlog, they'll lob balls back over into the pilot's court, right? And say, well, we didn't have this piece of paper, or we didn't have this, or we want to see this. And so they'll kick it back, and that buys them, in their eyes, more time. And each time you kick it back, that's another 6-month wait. So you're talking about for seeing therapy, if you're not prepared on the front end, you could be, for seeing a therapist, you could be out for 2.5 years. So it's important to talk to an attorney at the front end to start getting the appropriate documentation, to get the evaluation so that when you submit for the first time, it's correct the first time and it gets approved the first time to come back. So the FAA will allow you to fly. They just need all the documentation to CYA. And why they are CYA, like, I don't know, why they're CYA is
who's
unbelievable to me.
Come get them. They're not held accountable for literally anything else that they do.
That's it. It bothers me so much, and I've heard it closed door where they say, well, Joe, I'm not going to be the one that gets sued if a pilot has a Germanwings event. To which my response is, you're not going to be sued anyway. We have governmental immunity. The Governmental Immunity Act stops any doctor from the FAA from being sued. Oh, and by the way, you're also not providing any patient care, so you're immune from medical malpractice regulation. So you have no board action, you have no civil legal obligation under medical malpractice regulations or laws, and you have no governmental obligation because you're immune. So what do you CYA? It's ridiculous. And for those people that say, well, they're protecting the public, forgive me, but bullshit. I've heard behind the doors that these people are worried about their own jobs and they're worried about their own civil liability, which is ridiculous.
So I think to put a bow on it, go get treatment, but also talk to an attorney while you're doing it. You might have to pay 2 bills, but it just is what it is. And don't sit there and suffer because it's your life. No matter what, your life comes first and figure the rest out later.
Yeah, do not suffer in silence.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Well, this has been another excellent episode of the VIPC. We've gotten a lot of feedback on the guests, so we're going to definitely continue that for the listeners. Have gotten a lot of positive feedback. I think this one is probably going to be our most listened episode if I had to guess. How can you help make that happen? Share this with a friend, with a colleague in business aviation. We want to help grow this show. So hit the share button on your favorite podcast player or on YouTube. Share the clips on LinkedIn. That helps us get some distribution going. This is a show built for aviation professionals. It is designed to be short enough to be able to listen to on your commute. And that's what the reviews are saying. Speaking of reviews, leave us a review on Apple, leave comments on YouTube, on Spotify. It really helps us grow the show. We would really appreciate it. So be sure to do that. Thank you to those who have done it. We will start reading your reviews live on the air. Share the VIPC newsletter. If you do, we are going to give you a shout out live on the air. So if you share with 2 people and they sign up, we give you a named shout out and we'll plug whatever thing that it is you want us to plug. So there's a free thing. We are looking forward to next week. Joseph, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think that this is a really important issue. And thanks for coming on and talk about it. I'm looking forward to having you back on in a couple of months when it passes through the House or passes through the Senate, gets signed by the president, and then we can have a celebration show.
That'd be amazing. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate it. This is an awesome opportunity and it's so great to talk to you guys. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks. We will see you next week.